rise in opposition to H.R. 702, a poorly crafted bill that needlessly and recklessly sweeps away 40 years of critical energy protections for national security, our economy, consumers, and the environment. H.R. 702 is a blunt object that doesn't just undermine current protective authorities related to crude oil, it also prohibits any federal official from taking any action at any time if that action either restricts or enforces a on the export of oil. The term restriction is undefined and potentially dangerous in scope. The bill would also override any other law that would impose any restriction by any federal official on exports. That means that the bill does nothing to preserve any environment or safety statutes or regulations, and it doesn't even preserve the Defense Production Act, one of the most important tools any president has to ensure our national energy security in the face of a threat. Let's be clear, Mr. Chairman. The President has already stated that he will veto this bill. Further, any legislation of this nature is completely unnecessary since the President already has the authority to ease or even remove restrictions on crude oil exports, and the Obama administration has taken major steps to exercise that authority by approving crude oil swaps with Mexico and applications for the export of condensate. The bottom line, Mr. Chairman, is that it is imperative for Congress to consider a host of factors before we lift the current restrictions, and certainly if we are to completely dismantle our nation's ability to restrict oil exports as proposed by H.R. 702. First, Mr. Chairman, there are consumer impacts, especially related to the price of crude oil and gasoline. A recent study found that changes to U.S. oil export policy will have little to no impact on the future price of oil. What we do know is that changes in our crude oil policy will lead to a significant payday for oil producers, with increases in annual profits approaching $30 billion by 2025. Next, there are the impacts on our refinery capacity and associated jobs, well-paying middle-class jobs that have grown over the past few years due to increased production. Unrestricted exports of crude oil puts those jobs in jeopardy and could mean exporting those jobs and losing out on critical investments in future refining capacity. And finally, Mr. Chairman, there are, of course, the environmental and climate impacts of lifting the export ban. Energy policy is fundamentally linked to environmental policy. Each is a facet of the other. Increasing crude oil exports means increasing domestic production and its impacts on climate change, public health, worker safety, property owners, and protection of our drinking water supplies. And as I've said before, this legislation eagerly embraces short-term profits and benefits without understanding or even considering the cost of such a major action. We simply can't afford to make that mistake. We should ensure we fully understand and consider the enduring consequences of our action and choose the cleanest and most sustainable path forward. I don't believe, Mr. Chairman, that the potential impacts of H.R. 702 on national security, on the economy, on consumers, and on the environment can be considered acceptable. So, Mr. Chairman, increased crude exports certainly help oil companies. It's a bonanza for the oil companies, but without any guaranteed benefit for consumers. I urge my colleagues to join me and the President in saying no to this legislation, and I reserve the